This podcast is part of the Midwest Podcast Network. Find out more about our other shows and how to support our network at MidwestPodcastNetwork.com. Welcome to Gone to Texas, a podcast about AMC's Preacher. My name is Alex, and I have not read any of Ennis and Dillon's Preacher.
And I'm Nick, and I have read all of Ennis and Dillon's Preacher.
Today we will be discussing Season 2, Episode 7 of the AMC series titled Pig. While we will not be spoiling any of the comic, and by extension any future plot lines of the show, we will be discussing the details of the series through Season 2, Episode 7, so pause this and go catch up before you listen to the rest of the episode. You can find more episodes of our podcast at g2tpodcast.com. That's the letter G, number 2, letter T, podcast.com. We're also G2T Podcast on Twitter, and you can send feedback to g2tpodcast@gmail.com to tell us what you think of our podcast and share your thoughts on AMC's Preacher so we can read them on our show. Send us corrections, observations, or anything regarding Preacher or our podcast. Today, we got a lot of listener feedback from several different people, and it's fantastic.
Fabulous.
Thank you so much for writing in. Please continue to do so.
Do so.
Lots of different ideas and other things that people wrote in about. So let's get to it. Everybody seemed to touch on the Souls for Sale stuff. So yes. I kind of pulled those comments out just to get the poll of the audience. So Mike wrote in, he said, I'm sure a lot of people will not like the Souls for Sale bit, but I absolutely loved it. Creative as hell, and I continue to enjoy the idea that heaven and hell and the supernatural world have the same petty little problems that we all have. A pretty metered response. I think that makes sense. And everybody here seems to put a little more context into it than I did in terms of the, I thought it was cool, but it doesn't feel like it's comics material.
Right.
But
yeah, we and myself in particular are unfortunately sometimes unconsciously bound by the books.
Similar to Mike's feelings about Jesse and how much of a dick he's being in the show.
Yeah, and a lot of the feedback really did a great job of reminding me that these are two separate. This is an adaptation.
Yeah.
And that things are going to diverge, and sometimes that's for the best.
It brought us back to our conversation that we had a couple episodes ago.
Yeah.
Mike did send us a comic spoiler email that I just notified you about so you could read. And I didn't know if there was much that you could respond to on air, but I just wanted to acknowledge that we got it.
Yes, and I want to acknowledge that I'm just really have been poor about replying to it. But I did read it, and I like where your head's at, Mike. And I will respond to it.
There we go.
Because I think there's definitely some... You're going in a good direction, I think. So more to come probably off air when we talk about that.
Sounds good. We got an email all the way from Bombay, India, which is mind-blowing to me.
So dope.
Vijayta, I hope I didn't butcher her name, but I did ask for a pronunciation. So she said, just had a theory about the whole Saint of Killers accepting Jesse at face value when he says God is gone. I think the Saint of Killers can tell when people are telling the truth. In the first episode of this season, he told Preacher Mike that there's no use lying. He'd know the truth. Again, in the same episode, he knows it's false when the gas station attendant says they weren't here before his tongue gets ripped out. She puts awesome in quotations, or in parentheses. I think this is why he believes Jesse so readily. That's a great point.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that at all.
Yeah, he may have some...
Truth lie detector powers.
Exactly.
Interesting. I don't know how that would work for him, but I mean those are two very concrete examples of him being able to.
Absolutely, yeah. It may just be part of his power set,
or maybe he's just doesn't take any bullshit.
Along with his,
I don't know.
Yeah, it could also be just like it may not be a power so much as the grit and experience of just dealing with bad people and like professional liars that some people, even like federal agents are trained to know through so many ways when someone's lying or when they're telling the truth, and maybe he just has a little more insight.
That's entirely
But I do
possible.
totally believe the possibility exists that it's part of his like power set along with his yogurt boiling bullets and crazy weapons.
Vijayta went on to say, I'm digging the soul twist. It's interesting that they have updated the whole selling your soul to the devil bit and have brought it to the 21st century. I'm completely fine with the technology coming into the mix. It's different. In parentheses, also, I'm a longtime Supernatural fan, and I'm tired out from all their soul shenanigans.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a short-time Supernatural fan anymore because it has gone on forever.
I want to meet the guy that jumped in at season 9.
Dude, it blows my mind because I watched it through season 6, and I thought, my God, this show's been going on for a long time.
Yeah.
That was when season 6 aired,
Yeah.
which was now 6 or 7 years ago. The show is twice as old as it was when I was watching it, and I thought it was old then.
Does it keep? I guess this is a question for the Midwest Supernatural Nerds podcast, but does it keep getting 22 episode seasons?
Probably.
I'll do some fact checking in a minute.
The stupid thing is it's really good. I mean, all the way through season 6, which was half its lifetime ago, I still thought it was a great show.
And that's all I've ever heard, and I've never seen any of it, and I really need to check it out.
Yeah, it's a cool show because I wish we got more original properties like that kind of get a cool hook, and then they turn in a new direction and kind of really hit their stride.
Yeah.
Because like the first season's a lot of fun, but it's like Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
And then season 2 suddenly builds this crazy overarching story that continues for like the next 4 or 5 years, and then each season has its own little arc, and then like 2 through 4 have their own arc. It's really cool.
That's
Like
awesome.
it just becomes really layered, and it builds this universe.
Well, maybe after Preacher, I'll dive into it. It looks like there's 12 seasons.
Ye gods, you have so much watching.
There's 12 seasons, and there's only one of them that is under 22 episodes.
Dude, it's crazy.
That's nuts.
It's a fun show. It's a little corny from time to time, but it's fun.
Yeah. Vijayta, thank you very much for writing in. We're
Yes.
very glad to have you listening halfway
Absolutely.
across the world. That's so awesome. Bruce, longtime friend of the show, Bruce wrote in. He said, I love the season on the whole so far, even if the Victor subplot was slightly fillery. I thought episode 6 was okay, but the soul harvesting plot felt a bit hokey, and I now have no clue how souls are supposed to work in this universe. The saint doesn't have one, yet goes to hell. It just raises too many questions. I'm glad I'm not the only one who was slightly thrown by the intro. I felt like I was watching a lost episode of the Constantine TV show for a few minutes. And it all felt like they wrote themselves into a corner with Genesis not working on the saint, but then very quickly undid it to make him less OP, overpowered for those who aren't as huge nerds as we are. But overall, I thought the episode was decent. Bruce, great to hear from you.
Yes. Welcome back, Bruce.
Fine points. Somebody on Nick's side of the soul.
Whoa.
The soul. We're setting up the teams here now.
There's a firmly taped line across the middle of this podcast table, and there are extra chairs, so come and sit on whichever side you subscribe to.
Yes, everybody's welcome.
No,
Let me get through Joseph's email, and then we can slightly relitigate this whole thing if you want to talk about it a little bit.
Yeah.
Bruce did want me to mention he does have a podcast called Screenplay Archaeology. It's on SoundCloud. He told us last year he was going to make an episode where he goes back through the different adaptations of Preacher that were attempted, because there's scripts and things that are out there. So I haven't listened to it because there are comic spoilers in it, but it is out there on SoundCloud. Search for Screenplay Archaeology. It's the most recent episode that he put out.
I'm going to find it. Because we talked about that, I think, in season 1 of our show.
Yeah, he messaged us. He'd been planning on doing it for a while, and he just got around to it.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
I'm going to look for it.
Thank you for joining us once again, Bruce. And then Joseph wrote in. Joseph wrote in during season 1, and I missed his email because we had 2 podcast emails set up, and I now have them filter into the same email, so I can catch everybody's emails now. But Joseph wrote in. He said, I wanted to give you my experience of Sakosha as a non-comic reader. I really enjoyed it, and it feels like they are building a world. Definitely not the world of the comics, and maybe all the mysteries won't pay off, but so far it's very cool. Magic and voodoo, I definitely get the feeling that magic isn't hidden very far below the surface in Preacher's universe. Eugene and Mike really expect to feel God answering their prayers. And side note, I think they say that they don't feel him there anymore.
Yeah. Yep.
So there are books about actual soulless monsters in the library, and angels are auditioning actors to play God. There's a lot of supernatural stuff, hokey stuff going on.
Yep.
Under the circumstances, the voodoo soul extractors and the Japanese soul company felt like they fit. They tied with Jesse's comments on his mother's family not coming to the wedding, and it generally fit with the weird steampunky magic science that the show universe is setting up. Hell runs on wonky projector machines. Angels call home on a crank phone. So if there are voodoo practitioners taking soul, why not use needles and the spinner that Jesse points out in the voodoo shop? And if there is magic science, is it surprising that somebody smart would find a better way to do it? Fair point. He says, this season feels to me like it's mostly about character revelations. Cassidy is revealing himself to be more manipulative and cunning than the helpless, good-hearted doofus we saw in season 1. Tulip is searching for some kind of family and structure. I don't know if I agree about that Tulip point. Because
it remains a little unclear as to what exactly Tulip is searching for.
She
even more so at the end of this episode.
Yeah. Well, and she kind of abandoned the family and structure kind of thing from Victor. Like when she goes to Victor, but obviously she found some of that in Victor too. So that's kind of she's there's more to it than that, I guess.
Tulip's definitely the kind of person for who the grass is always greener on the other side, and like she'll hop over to that side and go, "Well, this is pretty nice, but I liked that," and then hop over there and say, "Well,
but I missed this."
She wants to have her cake.
Yeah. And Jesse runs much deeper than suspected in season 1. He's not just a reformed Bonnie and Clyde badass trying to make good. Victor showed us just how dark he can go into a rage and how concerned Tulip is about how dark he can go. And we still may not know how far he can sink. Sakosha showed us that he has some black magic roots as well. Kind of the most terrifying thing about Jesse is how judgmental and, Old Testament-style God he can get when he's in a rage. He calls Cassidy on just who he is. He gets fully medieval on Victor and his torturer, and his sheer outrage at the idea of the saint going to heaven is a little terrifying. I think some of that is how much Jesse hates the parts of himself that he knows are wrong, but I also wonder if they're setting up a parallel between Jesse and God himself. Jesse isn't just learning the lesson of why God has to give people free will by watching what happens when he tries to command them. He's also learning the difference between justice and mercy. Victor, his torturer, Cassidy, the saint, Tulip, etc. all deserve condemnation, but maybe it's better to give them forgiveness. If I'm right, the show takes it all the way. The final solution is the biblical one, for Jesse to take the punishment that everyone else deserves and give them another chance. I think that would be hard to bring home, however, so I'd be surprised if they went that far. Maybe. I think it's an interesting road for them to go down.
It is.
Jesse as the Jesse Custer, Jesus Christ. I mean... That's entirely possible. And then Joseph's final point here, he says, the saint, I'll confess, whenever Nick talked about how awesome it was that the saint just chases Jesse over and over and over like Jaws chasing the family in Jaws 1, 2, 3, and 4, I was not excited. As much as Nick loves his comic books, I don't think a repetitive element like that would make for good TV. As an unspoiled show watcher, what I got from the episode is that the saint is an asshole. He's not just a wrong father searching for justice. He killed DeBlanc and all those cops and all those random people just because he likes killing. And when he gets a chance, he does it like you or I might grab a brownie from the plate as we pass by. He just likes it. He doesn't give a shit about the people he's killing any more than we feel sorry for that brownie. So when Jesse pulls out his judgment voice and starts mocking the saint for thinking he might get to go to heaven, he's absolutely right, but I'll be interested to see if a smidgen of the soul changes the saint in any way.
Yeah, that is a really mean moment for Jesse.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, to go... so that's a really loaded email.
There's a lot in there, and that's why I wanted to read it in full, because I felt like there were several awesome points.
Yes, which I've already forgotten. I am already formulating replies, and then the next good point comes up, and I discard that one and start thinking of a new one.
So I guess the first... we can take it in sections here, the magic and the voodoo. We can talk about the Soul Company here. Like, it... after finishing last week, it kind of... I feel like I'm willing to give the rest of the season to see if Jesse's family stuff grounds that anymore. I don't know if it's going to, but I want to see if it does. And even if it doesn't, I'm kind of okay of it being this concept that is possible in this world of Preacher.
Yeah, you put it really well when you likened it to Constantine. You thought there's this kind of underlying world where there's a weird blend between magic and technology, and it doesn't necessarily ever get fleshed out or explained, and that's okay. And I think that does work, and I think that on other properties I would really welcome that. Like, I really love when movies and TV are unafraid to throw you into a world and let you sort it out.
Yeah.
And I think that it's one of those things where after our conversation last week, and then, spending another week kind of thinking about it, it does digest better with me than I thought it would.
Yeah.
But I just don't know if... it's tough because even the kind of extreme fantastical stuff in the book kind of feels feasible.
Yeah.
And souls are such an intangible, undefinable thing, as you said last week, that it's hard to kind of tackle that and expect us to just be like, oh, I'm okay with it. You know what I mean?
I wonder if
it's
they
a bit
would
of an
have
ask.
if they would have put a little more grease over the lens in terms of like not showing them going into the vent. Like if it wasn't like an intravenous process.
Yeah.
Like if it was just like a weird like vest that he put on or something like that.
I think what it's going to boil down to is if, as you, I think it was you, Alex, who mentioned if these people have been supplied this technology by some sort of fallen angel or some sort of heavenly host of some sort who has helped humans do this, then it'll make a little more sense, because I don't think humans can devise something like this on their own. And maybe they can.
And that's kind of what I was wondering if we cover that with Jesse's family. It seems like if they're very much into the voodoo-y part of it, if the voodoo process, like if we cut to a flashback of somebody doing the old school voodoo and developing that process, I don't know why we would ever do that, so I question that it would ever happen. But
yeah, same here. Like I'm at this weird tipping point where I need a little more, but at the same time I don't want the show to spend any more time on anymore.
Yeah.
But I don't want it to be treated as a throwaway device of saying like, here's how we get souls and this is it. You know what I mean? So yeah, like you're saying, fleshing out the history of it might make it a little bit easier to cope with, but right now it's just kind of in this little awkward non-committal phase, and I gotta wait for the rest of the season to play out to know how it's really gonna land, because a lot of these rogue sort of elements and plot points and deviations that the show is taking from the books, my gut reaction to most of them is one of like, you know, kind of curling my lip at it and going, I don't know about that. But obviously a lot of the listeners embrace a lot of it wholly, which I think is probably the appropriate reaction. We're just, you know, and I'm going to say this every week. We're at that point now where this season is now running parallel to the books. And so naturally some things aren't going to sit well. Yeah. And some things are probably going to be improvements. And it's wholly possible, if not probable, that at the end of the season I'll look back and say that was a really cool decision. Or AMC Jesse Custer is a more interesting, well-developed character than comic book Jesse Custer. Yeah. Which is... You know, the comic Jesse, as we've talked about, is pretty two-dimensional, and that's kind of what I like about him. He's almost your Cypher in a way sometimes, and even though he has a past and it does get visited, he's often surrounded by this crazy stuff, and you're really along for the journey with him. Yeah, because he's getting introduced to these wacky characters in these crazy situations. Yeah, and so I feel like he was sort of that for us in season 1, and the more complex he gets, he simultaneously becomes a better character, but I also lose that sort of connection I have with him as like he's going through this with us. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, but I think even in this week's episode, I think we maybe might see it kind of pivoting towards Tulip more. And that's true. Tulip's feelings about this, and obviously it's if it's Jesse in the comics, like I think there's certainly some like. It's hard because they're kind of like the show, to me, and I don't know if this is right, the show feels a little more ensemble than the comic even does. Like these three are like yes and no. Yeah. So I don't necessarily know. I can't commit to that being true or not, but it does spend more time with the characters individually in the show than in the book. Usually Jesse's always there. Yeah. Or Tulip and Cassidy are there. You get more one-on-one time with them in the show, for sure. But in the book, Jesse is pretty much constantly reacting to situations on the fly without necessarily a real good game plan or knowledge. And in this show, he's actually shown like he has solutions for problems other than just fighting his way out of it. Yeah. And so he's, you know, like the voodoo thing, he goes in and he shows immense knowledge of this. And in the books, he pretty much just knows about like fist fighting and drinking. Yeah. And that makes him more John Wayne-ish. And so he's easier to just kind of like go along with. Yeah. So again, it's good. Objectively, it's good. Like how much more he has going for him in the show and how much more time they're spending trying to round him out. But obviously it's just different. And so it takes a beat. We'll see in the back 6 episodes here if they can meet it up on the other side. However, the Saint, I do not like them trying to make the Saint a little more of a character. I guess they're not trying to make him more of a character, but I understand the criticism of like him just being this unstoppable driving force, but I still think it's great because I don't really view the Saint as so much of a character as more of like a story device. Well, and I think to Joseph,
I don't know if he realizes, maybe he does, but the way that you're describing the Saint to me as being this unstoppable force, it's something that is always there. It's not like it's something in the comic book where there's always a page about the Saint and whatever crap he's currently in on his way headed to Jesse.
Yeah, every issue does not end with him walking through like a cornfield.
Yeah, which it is like in the TV show almost.
Yeah.
So I think maybe it's litigated a little bit better in the comic in terms of like, here's a frame of the Saint walking on a highway somewhere or something, and then you forget about it for several issues.
Yes.
So it plays differently on the show as opposed to...
And I shouldn't say that he's not a character in the book because he does have character. It's just, it happens quickly and that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
So he's not a shark. I think the parallel to Jaws is hilarious. I mean, I was laughing really hard when I read the email and just now when Alex was reading it. But that's pretty much exactly it. And I think in the book they do move more frequently. They're always on the move a lot more. They're not spending like weeks in one location. So having him always kind of around is kind of an okay thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes the characters I think forget about him too.
Yeah.
And I just think it's a really cool thing to have in the background. Like I think giving him a little bit more to do in the show or making him more complex in terms of him not having a soul and now having 1% of a soul, I think that's interesting. I just don't love that he's just in a truck in the bottom of a swamp. And we know he's going to get out.
Yeah.
And that's all well and fine.
At this point, I'm kind of okay for him to not show up. Like, it could go a few different ways. If he didn't show up until the finale, I think
the season finale?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that'd be okay. And if he didn't show up till season 3, I'd probably still even be okay with that.
And it'll be an awesome moment.
But I kind of don't want to see him get out of that truck. What do you think about that? Like, what if we just don't know that he gets out and then he shows up, as you know, at the worst possible moment?
That's probably what'll happen.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be the smart thing to do. It would be a cool moment. It's one of those things where fans of the show and the book will, if they see somebody, if the season ends with somebody towing that truck out, and that's all we see, that will be cool. But you're right. If we hold that out just a little bit longer and then we just see him.
It's the old Hitchcock surprise versus suspense. If we don't get the suspense of this and we just get the surprise of this, I think that's a good...
It would be pretty cool.
I think that fits what you've told me of the Saint more than the... We know he's back on the road again.
Yeah.
And we'll see him in a few episodes.
What's funny is he's still on the show even if he's locked up. Like he features pretty prominently in this episode and I think it's terrific.
Yeah. And... yeah, this show's kind of weird, too, because even the guy, Pip Torrens, who plays Herr Stark, and Julianne Emery, who plays Lara Featherstone, are both in the main credits, and we don't see them for 3 or 4 episodes out of these first 7, which is kind of crazy, but also cool to me. Like,
it's cool they're not stingy about giving people, like, proper billing.
Yeah.
Because shows like, I remember Deadwood, the opening credits had, like, I mean, that cast is huge, and there would only be so many of them listed in the credits. And then you would have the credits of the show, and then they would show up at the lower thirds, like directed by, guest starring, and you would see, even though if they were in, 10 straight episodes, they'd still be guest stars. You know what I mean? I like that for this show, they're just like, screw it. They're main cast members.
Yeah, and I guess maybe that goes to show how focused they are on these 3 main characters. Like they're so integral to at least the beginning of the first half of the season that the other people that they're considering main characters of the season aren't showing up in earnest until halfway through. So yeah,
I really would love to keep these kind of conversations going with people via email and that sort of thing. Maybe we can even start like, if we get down the road and we find that we're able to make the time, maybe we can start like a Slack chat and start inviting people, because I know another podcast I listen to, they do that for a bit and they start to invite people to their Slack chat, and then we can kind of talk a little more frequently.
We can totally do that. We can even make a spoiler and non-spoiler section so that you guys can talk to me and also talk to Nick. So.
Yeah, and we, part of the reason we started doing shows like this was to be able to have these conversations with each other, and it gets harder the older we get to find the time to sit down and have these kind of talks. And so if we can make an outlet like that for other people as well, I think that'd be pretty cool. Most message boards are just cesspools, and when you want to discuss something that you like with people who also like it, it's hard to find people who are civil and
absolutely,
and willing to hear other points of view.
That's very true. All right. With all that said and done, thank you guys very much for writing in. We'd love to keep hearing from you. Maybe we'll figure out the Slack chat going on too, because that would be a lot of fun. But if that's something that interests you, please let us know.
And if you had a point that we didn't hit that you think you would like to hear a little bit more on, just circle back around with your email.
Oh, absolutely.
We it was an embarrassment of riches this week in terms of feedback.
Yeah. So please, we absolutely read everything we get, and if there are things that I don't mention, it's not because I don't think they're important. It's just because I'm trying, for the sake of things, to not take 20 minutes to do feedback, which I just did.
Yeah.
So
enjoy that first part of the episode if you didn't write in and you don't care.
Yeah.
But yeah, write in. I mean, I'm so guilty of it too. I listen to a lot of shows and they're always like, please write in anything. Let us know that you're out there and you're listening. And I'm always like, I should. And then I don't.
I was geeked that we got an email from India last week.
On.
Like that was awesome. And even from anybody, you could email me from Royal Oak, Michigan, and I'm going to be just as happy about it because I'm glad to know that people are out there listening.
And we've been fortunate too with people who write in. Like we have never really had any like trolls or anybody who's just trying to goad us into anger or anything like that. Like people genuinely love this and want to talk about it, and that's just fantastic.
Absolutely. All right, so let's move on with episode 207 titled Pig. The manila folder, the top one, the one above Jesse Custer and Herr Stark's
Starr.
Herr Starr, excuse me.
Keep saying Stark.
God damn it.
Just got Downey on the mind.
Yeah, or Game of Thrones, either way.
Oh yeah, there's a bunch of Starks running around.
Herr Starr's pile of files.
Pile.
Pile. Pig is on top above Jesse, and we finally get to find out what the pig is in this teaser. In Vietnam, a pig begins levitating, attracting attention from all over the world. Herr Starr visits the pig and is disgusted by the worship it's receiving. It was pretty short. Did you like the teaser?
It spooked me out at first when she's screaming. I was like, who is standing there? I was
like, what the hell is she looking at?
I was bracing myself for something really just crazy, and I had no idea what it was going to be. And then when it was revealed, I was like, oh, that's cute.
Yeah.
It was not. I expected something like horrifying.
Yeah.
I didn't know what it was though. I thought it was gonna be like a reanimated corpse, and I really had no idea.
Yeah,
that was cool though.
That was pretty good. And then when Herr Starr gets out of the vehicle to like land in Vietnam, the kid runs up with an Atlanta Falcons jersey, Super Bowl championship shirt on.
Yeah. I love that. I'm always fascinated by what happens to the losers' apparel.
Yeah,
because boy, do they make it. I mean, they make the jerseys, they make the hats, the pennants, the stickers, and then it just gets donated to like third world
Vietnam,
to third world countries. And I've seen these crazy photos of just stuff like that. Like, looking at mostly Detroit teams who like made an appearance but didn't win, and you see some kids in another country wearing their stuff, and you're just like, oh god, that's just so weird. It's just strange that that's where it ends up. You know what I mean?
I saw it, and because I'm not like an avid football guy, I'm like, did they didn't win, did they? And I had to look it up, and I was like, that's fantastic.
It was very funny.
So
there's definitely a lot of really... These are the kind of jokes that I love in this show.
Yeah.
That are quick and that are subtle.
Actually subtle.
and really clever. And they don't need to be there to make the show work.
No.
But they just bring it to life that much more. Almost like the Dick Cheney joke.
Absolutely.
Things like that. Even though I don't even want to say that's a cheap shot. It was good. But little things like that, they don't need to be there, and yet they just enhance the flavor so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else in the teaser?
Oh, man, Herr Starr. Even from the teaser.
Even from the beginning.
I was like, oh, boy, has he arrived.
I was very curious because I was like, we're spending a lot of time with Herr Starr in this episode, and I was like, I can't wait to see what Nick felt, because it felt like they were actually beginning to characterize him, obviously. So
yeah, and they characterize him more than they do in the books, and I loved it. So
that's awesome.
Something weird is going on with me, where with some, nobody gets a free pass. It's like I have to see what they do and how they do it in order to discover if I like it or not.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I shouldn't say they do anything with him that's out of character. It's all very in line with him, and it's not like he really develops. He's pretty much true to himself from start to finish, and it's just pure gold.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about him more in a minute. Yeah. Into Act 1, as the drunk and dead carts clean up the bodies on the streets of New Orleans.
So good.
The gang exits the last jazz club in the city. Jesse takes note of a doomsday speaker across the street while Cassidy convinces the gang to go to the Hurt Locker. The gang grift the entire betting crowd there by shooting Cassidy with the largest gun possible, and after everybody leaves, Jesse claims their money out of the betting box. I like the appearance of the Hurt Locker, as Cassidy brought it up last episode.
Mm-hmm.
And that whole thing feels like a lot of what we were talking about with Westworld, of people taking pleasure in terrible, disgusting things to do to other humans.
Yeah.
Although people are volunteering to be shot, so I guess
and
it's
they're
not
betting
as
on
bad. Yeah, and they're totally betting on it. So it's gross all around, but it's not quite as bad as...
It's really crazy how they choose that gun and they're like surprised when it goes through him and kills him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're like shocked, like that's what happened. And I'm like, are you kidding? You could shoot a rhino with that thing. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It was a good scene though. I liked it. It was a little bit of like that felt very in line with the camaraderie of the three of them in the books. Like that's the kind of thing they would do to scare up some cash, and they wouldn't feel bad about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because they're fleecing people that aren't really good. I mean, they're not necessarily bad either. They're just stupid.
Yeah.
But they're just taking their money, and I liked it. And all the three characters were good. The kind of tension that Jesse felt between Cassidy and Tulip was interesting.
And in that moment, he doesn't. It goes back to the micro expressions that Dominic Cooper's using, because it doesn't feel like he's threatened by it, but he takes note of it.
Yeah.
And you know that he does.
He doesn't break character in their little con.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, like, is he gonna flip out?
It's like, when is it gonna come up?
Right. And then it just came up at the bar, and then it kind of gets laughed off.
Yeah.
But it's, yeah, like you said, he takes note.
It's there for sure. Cassidy reacting to Tulip's overacting at the end there was pretty good too, because she screams out no.
Yeah.
And you see Cassidy just give this look of like, where the hell did that come from? It was pretty good.
I like how they have a blood pouch ready with a straw. Yeah. like it's a Capri Sun for him. It's great.
Cassidy's own personal Capri Suns.
Yeah.
That'd be a great tie-in for the show.
Missed opportunity.
All right. Anything else on Act 1?
No.
Act 2, hanging out at the Hurt Locker. Tulip has been having trouble sleeping ever since she met the Saint, and Jesse seems slightly jealous about her kiss with Cassidy. Cassidy learns that Denis is dying and wishes his father would grant him immortality, but Cass ends up getting picked up by the dead cart, as when he is prodded with the taser,
literally drinks himself to death, I think.
Yeah.
I think he may actually be dead.
Yeah, that's fair. And then Herr Starr provides some backstory in his interview with the men in white suits. So, yeah, there's not a whole lot here, but obviously Tulip's been affected by the thing with the Saint, as I was kind of thought I was seeing last episode. And even by the end of this episode, I don't necessarily know that I grasp it all the way. My guess last week was that she's dealing with her own mortality, but
yeah, I have another theory along the lines of that maybe is a little more lingering.
Yeah,
if you want me to talk about it an hour later,
we'll bring it up in a little bit.
Oh, okay.
I brought things up a little early, but Denis wants to be a vampire.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
When you put it that way, it's even funnier. He doesn't want to be a vampire. He wants to live forever.
He wants to be immortal, yeah, but...
Cassidy is really like the bare minimum requirements to be a vampire, though. He just needs to drink blood. Like, he doesn't fit a lot of the archetypes of vampires where they're kind of evil and they're... I mean, well, I guess I shouldn't say that about Cass, because I think he has some evil tendencies.
Yeah, we're seeing more.
He even kind of hints at... but I know, he's just like... He just needs to drink it to heal. Like, he doesn't even crave it like every day, you know what I mean? We only see him drinking it when like he's been wounded.
Well, and the other major thing that we see is he obviously burns in the sun,
right?
Too, so,
but he doesn't seem to have the disposition of what we think of when we think of vampires. And even in the book, he's a little bit more bloodthirsty. Obviously, still with a very like charming bent to it.
Yeah. But
it's part of the whole Cass character. I think that whole sort of facade of likability.
Yeah. Well, and it's not even like he feels the need to sire other vampires. I think.
Right.
So it's
in fact, he like actively resists it. He's like mortified by the thought of doing that to Dennis.
Dennis, yes.
Oh, God, I love that. I love that he just he
doesn't even try.
Find the dump truck full of Emmys and dump it into Joe Gilgan's house.
Yep. Absolutely.
So that he can't breathe and he suffocates. Because he is so good. And the way he just keeps casually throwing out Dennis.
Yeah.
And just refuses to adapt to calling him by his proper name is so funny.
Yeah. And then Herr Starr. So we're kind of...
Oh, the scene at the bar, real quick. The scene with Dennis, I thought, Denis, there I go, is really sad and really terrific. I thought it was great. Like, I could watch a whole episode of the two of them interacting. And the Tulane French professor who just happens to have not fled the bar.
Yeah.
And is just sitting there who looks vaguely like Stephen King.
He was bent over the bar at first, so it's like he was passed out drunk. Right. But then he woke up and heard some French going on. It was
so funny. And for some reason, that's such a lazy, stupid thing to write in, but I was totally okay with it because they're kind of upfront with it. Like, here at probably 3 or 4 a.m. is the French professor from Tulane. It was funny.
Yeah.
I liked it. But the scene was definitely, a big twinge of melancholy. And when Denise storms out of there and the professor translates for him that then I will die hating you, and Cass says, like most people do. I was like, ooh.
Yeah.
God, is that good? That's so good. I can't wait for the show to be over just so that, I don't mean that in a way that I want it to be canceled at the end of the season or, anytime in the next few years. But I really want to be able to see it through to the end and then rewatch it all and look for and savor these little moments with like Jesse and Cassidy and Tulip as they're growing.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah.
It was a great scene.
It was very good. Herr Starr in Vietnam basically getting his shoes waxed and realizes that he can use the water as an excuse for the issue that's going on there.
Uh-huh.
But 2004, so I guess 13 years ago on the show, kind of maybe, Klaus Helmut Starr, he's like a high-ranking serviceman in Germany, and he's meeting with a man named Saltonstall. Is that somebody in the books? We never even hear his name in the show.
I don't remember.
Okay.
It could very well be. You meet a lot of people from that organization, and he is not the character who I thought he was going to be.
Okay.
So that guy, he's always that guy. He always plays like bad dudes on TV shows. He's actually in Supernatural for a while. And as soon as he popped up, I was like, oh, him? And then I was like, is he playing who, there's a certain character I thought he was playing. And thankfully he was not. Because I was like, that would have been
a waste. Over very
well,
quickly.
just not good casting. And then by the end of the episode, I was like, okay, clearly it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. So we didn't really get much information about him, but, other than obviously he was at the head of this Samson unit, or maybe.
I think he is the head of Samson unit.
Okay.
Yeah. They don't really clarify that until the end, and even then it's not entirely sure.
I didn't know if he was like appointing Starr the head of Samson unit or if he was the head of Samson unit.
I think he may have been interviewing for the position of like the sort of
I guess you said the right-hand man.
Yeah, sort of the field commander of the Samson unit, but maybe not the overall like director of the Samson unit.
That's fair, yeah.
And Starr's the kind of guy who he likes to get his hands dirty, but at the same time he doesn't want to answer to anybody. He doesn't have to.
Yeah. Fair enough.
In the book, Starr is firmly like in command of Samson unit to a hilarious degree.
Okay. Well, yeah, we only get a little bit of the backstory here, so we can continue on to Act 3 unless you want to say anything else about that.
The first couple hints at Starr's insane sexual deviancy were really funny.
Yeah.
He has the most erratic and in a crazy sexual appetite that doesn't make any sense, and it's really funny.
Yeah.
And he had several lines already in this first scene that made me like chuckle. Like I was watching this episode late at night and I was trying to be quiet while I was watching it on my iPad, and I actually like laughed out loud a couple times because totally moments from him because he is so good. And it's weird because I'm pretty forgiving of his like semi lackluster German accent.
Yeah, he
like definitely dips between British and German, and I'm like I don't even care because he just nailed the characterization so good.
Yeah,
so I can no longer hold that against Noah Taylor.
Well.
Although I guess not every German character needs to have like a cartoonishly broad true. German accent. His is definitely like this weirdly. It's there when it needs to be.
Yeah.
And at the right kind of syllables.
You just wouldn't expect a man who's like a commander of some kind in the army to like not have a thick
German
accent.
Yeah, exactly. You expect him to be like from the heartland of Germany. And in these type of characters we've seen in other movies and shows, they're usually kind of over the top and probably inaccurate.
Extremely overacted or something.
Yeah,
like
we're used to seeing like in Nazis in Indiana Jones movies, or like usually they're just very like crazy.
Yeah,
accents. Anyway, he's very, very fun to watch, and any praise I heap upon Starr is not because I agree with him in any way, but he's such a wildly entertaining character. And I think Pip, is it Torrens?
I think it's Torrens.
Okay. Yeah. He's really visually arresting. Like, he's very interesting to watch. And he has that look of just like mild distaste at all times, like he should. And it's just really fun to watch him, because he's kind of that character where you kind of have a really good handle on how he's going to react to any given situation. And I think that I've probably talked about other people on this show like that as well, where you get to know the character to a level where a situation presents itself and you're like, I can't wait to see what they're going to do, but you kind of know what vein it's going to be in. And I think I always default to sitcoms for this because they thrive on those kind of characters. And the two I always think of are Kramer and Joey Tribbiani. And they're obviously like the kind of wild card characters. But even though they are so kooky and so crazy, when you've been conditioned to know, like when a certain situation presents itself, you know how they're going to react, and you can't wait to watch it happen, even though it's a little predictable. Like if you see a beautiful woman come in Friends, you know what Joey's going to do, and you can't wait to see it. Yeah. And that's so satisfying in a weird way. Like you would think that the lack of suspense there would be dull, but it's not, because these characters are so fun. And that's kind of the way Herr Starr is.
Interesting.
Even though he surprised me a couple times this episode, and I thought it was so good. Anyway, he'll be a really fun one to watch unfold, and I'm so glad he's finally here. I've been bottling this in for so long now.
Well, good. I'm glad you can let it out.
Yes.
All right, Act 3, we've got Tulip having a double dream about her interaction with the Saint of Killers. She wakes up and tells Jesse that she dreamt about him again, but Jesse seems to brush it off and then goes to meet the Doomsday Sayer, the proselytizer, as I called him. I liked the dream sequence, but by the second time I watched it, I was just kind of like, I know everything that happens here, and I just kind of like glossed over it a little bit. You mean
a rewatch of the episode?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Okay. So it's like a dream and then another dream. So she dreams initially.
She gets like a very abstract dream of like the fingers, I'm floating and the fingers fall over her, and then she wakes up from that and goes to make tea, and then she gets kind of messed with. She goes back and forth between the hallway and closing the window.
So that scene I thought was so awesome. And I could totally see what you're saying. If I watched it again, I probably would have felt like this is a little too long. And even while I was watching it, I was like, what is going on? Like I began to suspect, like, okay, is this another dream? Because the window being reopened and then like the kettle being on. I thought it was awesome though. Initially, I was like, this is really suspenseful.
Yeah.
And I was really kind of on the edge of my seat, so to speak. And I was like, the show hasn't really done that to me yet.
Yeah.
Where I was like pretty thoroughly creeped out, actually, because I put myself in that scenario, and everybody's house or apartment or whatever has those like house
makes noises.
And it doesn't matter how long you live there. Eventually, like you get used to the common noises, but then a new one will kind of pop up, and you are just on high alert. And I've had those moments in my house where I've like gotten up and like walked around, kind of like her, to be like, what is that? And like in the back of my mind, I'm like, this is how people die. This is what happens. This is how they get you.
Yeah.
And you go around and check the door and you check the windows, and I think that's such a relatable fear that someone is in your dwelling, in your kind of bubble, and they're messing with you, that I thought it worked really well. And in a way, I was kind of bummed out that it was a dream, because I thought, okay, this is the members of the Grail coming into the house. That's what I thought it was at first. And like the window being open, and then like some sort of distraction in the hallway. And I was like, they're in there and they're trying to find her or Jesse. But that would probably be giving them too much credit, as you'll see. But anyway, I thought it was a really creepy sequence, and I absolutely loved this shot of the saint from her perspective, where he's like simultaneously really far away.
Yep. But his arm is like miles long.
Yes. Oh my God, was that,
that
so
was pretty
cool.
good.
That was so cool with that crazy overhead lighting and the hat tipped down to where it may not have even been Graham McTavish, and it doesn't matter. Like, that was so awesome.
They had, like, it was really good. They had a few instances of fantastic, really severe lighting.
Yes.
That was one of them. And then also later with Herr Starr, when they're doing the seduction test.
Yes.
And you see the lights come on and everybody's back there.
It was great.
It's awesome. That was really, really good.
The show definitely goes for it in terms of cinematography, and that was a big thing in season 1 also. And they actually talked about that a lot on the Insider podcast. They talked about how they were working to really make it visually interesting.
I'm so bummed that the podcast didn't come back, because it's that the one for Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad it's like a film school on its own. Maybe they'll do
like a season 2 recap, like a big episode.
Yeah.
But I did love listening to that. I thought it was great.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that sequence was just very cool. And, well, where does this scene end?
So this act ends kind of with Jesse brushing off Tulip's trepidation, or just kind of her like worry about all of the situation. Kind of like you can see him starting to be unavailable, essentially, for her to confide in.
This is the part where she says, "Don't you have that feeling that something's not right feeling?"
Yeah.
Okay. Here's where I'm going to talk.
Okay.
This is the part where I talk.
Yeah, I also didn't mention, but we did have Jesse watching Mark Herlich's audition tape once again.
And once again, we get to see Mark Herlich auditioning to play God. So good.
Getting a lot of mileage.
I hope it appears in every episode, because I think it's so good. And it's always the same part of the tape, too, that he's watching. I wonder if there's some kind of clue there.
Yeah, there might be something. Just like Jesse, we're missing something obvious.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Jesse's one-track mind is going to get him into lots of trouble, but I think it's going to also, he's going to miss things like Tulip clearly in some kind of distress.
Yeah.
So here's the part, and I felt this way last week, and I don't know if I expressed it or not because I can't remember what I say, but I was really curious how Jesse was going to react to missing a portion of his soul. And I don't mean in like a, like, oh no, I'm missing my soul kind of way, like he kind of is at the end of this episode.
Yeah.
But like in an unconscious way. Like,
how is it going to change him?
Yes, if you are depleted and not necessarily, I guess depleted is the wrong word. If you are somewhat diminished in terms of your soul, what does that do to your character? And I think, forgive me because I forgot who wrote in with this particular point. We've seen Jesse go really dark already.
Yeah, that was Joseph, I think.
Okay. I wonder if we're going to see him go to an even weirder, darker place. Like, I almost wish some of that was saved for this, I don't want to say soulless Jesse, but like a lesser version of Jesse.
Yeah.
And I think it's part of his character to just kind of cowboy up and be like, oh, no big deal kind of thing, as I think he kind of tries to do. But I want to know what kind of unconscious effects this is going to have on him. And we've already seen him kind of start to neglect Tulip, so I can't necessarily attribute that to this.
Yeah.
But I think maybe it could be increased.
Well, and I forgot to mention back in Act 2 that Tulip asked him straight out, he's in hell now, right?
Yeah.
And Jesse says yes, even though we know that he's not.
Well, she says he's gone. He's in hell, right? And Jesse says he's gone.
Okay.
He doesn't ever outright tell her. I was wondering.
It's a lie by omission.
Right. I was wondering, is he going to say it?
Yeah.
But he doesn't. Yeah, and I feel like the effects that Tulip is feeling are the sort of thing I would expect Jesse to be feeling. Like this kind of something's not right feeling.
Existential dread.
Yes, is something that I would think you would feel by having less of your soul, or some sort of underlying psychotic episode would happen by being less than you used to be. And I kind of think, and we see movies about like people losing their children or being kidnapped, or like I just watched Prisoners again recently, which is a phenomenal movie. It doesn't have anything to do with this, but please watch it. You see people reacting like when they're going through bouts of extreme grief and they're just not themselves.
Yep.
And I kind of am wanting to see something like that out of Jesse, because even if it's only 1%, it's kind of like in the Disney Hercules where doesn't he get 99% of his godhood back, but he's missing that like
something
the one
like
drop.
that. Yeah.
That's an awesome movie too. kind of has something to do with this, but please still do go watch it. It was on Netflix a while back, and I watched it. He's not quite what he should be until he gets.
That was going to be my argument. Was like it is 1%, but I would wonder if we're going to see a more gradual decline of Jesse's character or something like that.
Yeah, and we again souls. We can't measure them. 1% might be a lot. And because he asks the guy, "What's the minimum?" and he's like 1%. But then out of that donor or not donor, but that couple from the beginning of Sokosha, he takes 10 or 15, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so he said, "How about 10?" And he was like, 15 pays more.
Yeah.
And I was like, ew, like this is gross. But I mean, maybe it's not. I just don't know what kind of argument the show's trying to make by doing this, because I can't say that maybe the soul's something you don't need is kind of the point of the show, but I can't imagine that's what they're after, because it seems like they're building, as the Doomsday guy says, like there's something wrong with that.
Yeah.
Like there's clearly
give somebody a kidney, don't give them your soul.
Right, which is a great line. Anyway, I haven't fully developed my thoughts on this, but I expected something more out of Jesse in terms of like, and I think by the end of this episode, he's kind of starting to think like, maybe I shouldn't have just done that. But at the same time, is it such a courageous act, or was it an act of stupidity? And maybe it wasn't done out of, I don't know. Anyway, write in with your thoughts about that, because everyone that's written in clearly has thoughts on the soul thing.
Yeah, we feel one way or another about that, but what do you think about what the effects of it, like
should be or will be,
or how they'll present themselves in Jesse, obviously, because it's that's a serious.
Seems like a big deal.
It should be a serious thing. However, I also feel like I could see this show tossing it off, of being like doing the it's your soul. Who cares? Like. For some reason, I can only think about that Simpson episode where Bart gives his soul away for something stupid. I can't even remember the whole episode.
Yeah, he sells it for something really dumb.
Yeah,
right?
he trades it to like Millhouse.
Yeah,
to get a pack of gum, like a stick of gum or something. I can't.
Yeah, and I don't know if the whole thesis in the end of this show might be something like your souls ultimately are just a thing we make up, and it's about your acts. It's the things you do, not like who you claim to be inside or something like that. It could be, but at the same time, they're painting such a vivid picture of how terrible and evil and soulless, for lack of a better term, that the general populace are in this show, that I feel like it's got to matter somehow.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like the kind of thing you bring up haphazardly.
Yeah, which leads to the like we're gonna have to have more on the how this soul stuff works, because
and I think we will.
Yeah,
like Jesse kind of by the end of this episode seems to kind of begin to be a little bit worried, and obviously we know now he is bound to the Saint of Killers in some really cool way.
Yep.
Which I think that the two of them are gonna. This if anything cements the fact that he'll be back, because
it's like the Neo and Agent Smith kind of alpha and omega kind of situation.
A yin and yang, like they're gonna obviously need, one can't exist without the other now.
Yep.
Which is really interesting.
Yeah. All right. Act 4, we go back to 2004. Herr Starr is running through the games with the men in white suits to figure out who will take the position that's available. Ultimately, his ruthlessness wins him the job, where Saltonstall explains that the organization is called the Grail, and they've been protecting Christ's bloodline since he fathered a child before dying for our sins. Herr Starr's particular role in the organization is Samson Unit, who kills false prophets like Charlemagne, Lincoln, and John Belushi.
Yeah.
Herr Starr then shoves Saltonstall off the roof and claims his office as his own. So the Grail, just to mention, a few episodes back, I did a little clever editing, because we did go back to see that Grail Industries is on the map that Tulip gives to Danny in season 1. So we did get that little mention of Grail, and obviously that map did go to Herr Starr. Weird that she would be like having somebody. Why would Herr Starr need somebody to retrieve this map? Maybe somebody stole it, shouldn't have had it, or something like that. I don't know. Maybe that'll come up more later, but
yeah, I think the map is going to come into play in some regard.
Yeah,
maybe not.
So yeah, the training exercises. Obviously, we get to see Herr Starr's nipple piercings and chain that he's got between them, which talks to his sexual deviancy, as he was talking about, in some form, or self-image. I don't know. It doesn't necessarily have to be about that. Herr Starr's disinterest in the whole religious aspect of the situation is I find it, I want to call it intoxicating, but I just find it very entertaining.
Yeah.
The idea that he's like, you're going to validate our parking, right?
Oh my God, did I laugh. That was so funny.
It was really, really good.
And then he's so right. Like when he's I guess you shouldn't say he's right. He just is so, man, am I at a loss of words here?
It's kind of like
he just wants things to be done right, the right way. And
he's got it's like a righteous indignation kind of situation.
Yes. He respects process, I think, and procedure. And even the like, are you Christian? In the first scene, and he was like, does it matter? And then he's like, well, yeah. And he's like, well, then absolutely.
Well, yes, I am extremely.
Yeah, he's just, it feels like he's conquered everything he could, and he's just bored, which is pretty important to his character.
Yeah.
Like, I think part of the reason his insane sexual appetite exists is because he's just kind of bored.
He's trying to find new things.
He's done it. Yeah, he's done it all way too much. And he's just like is looking for new stimulation that he can't find anywhere else. And, well, I guess I can't really talk about that too much yet. Okay, I'll save that.
We'll circle back around at some point.
But that line, I'm so glad you mentioned that because I would have forgot to talk about it. That whole exchange made me laugh so hard, and the way he kind of turns to the other guys like,
yeah, like why don't any of you have this problem too?
Yeah, and then they only validate his parking. It's so funny, and I love the delivery of the line where he's like, "Had I known, I would have found street parking." Yeah. So listen, as Detroiters, this is a very real problem, and anybody who lives in any major city knows, but especially in the Motor City, where public transportation is like non-existent. Mm-hmm. Might as well be non-existent.
Yeah.
Because what little there is so overcrowded and just a nightmare. But parking is very expensive if you're going to go to like a structure or something, especially in the city. But even metered parking is expensive. So you do try to find those sort of off
nook
the
or
beat.
Cranny. Yeah.
Yes, and
there's people that park at the casinos here to go to stadium events down in downtown because it's free. Yeah.
And people will frequently park on like the street in like neighborhoods, but then you might be in like a sketchy neighborhood, and there's a okay chance, less so now, that your car will be vandalized in some way.
Yep.
It's just a very real problem. And so this whole exchange, I thought, even though it was a very small joke akin to the Atlanta Falcons thing, it just made a whole world of sense to me, and I thought it was so absolutely hysterical.
Yeah, it's kind of not even actually a joke. It's just a funny,
it's played
funny
straight.
exchange. Yeah.
And the direction and the performance on it were just so absolutely top notch. I thought this is what a wonderful introduction to this character and the way he's going to interact with other people, because that's totally the way he is, just very bullish.
We get to there's the one event where they're wrestling and he or kind of. I guess it's hand-to-hand combat is what they call it. Yeah. And the other guy gets him in a headlock, so he starts masturbating to throw him off and then gets the upper hand.
Well, yeah. I mean, that is part of his strategy, but then I think part of him is genuinely like aroused by the violence of it and like being like choked.
Yeah.
Like this is 2 or 3-fold.
Yep. And then also, obviously, the electrocution of their private parts was... he has no reaction to it.
One guy just gets killed.
They really paint a picture in these scenes with Herr Starr, for sure.
To the level of badass you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in like a complimentary way, but just someone who has tolerances for things that are pretty unreal.
So the idea of Jesus having father the child, is that something that is present in the Grail and the comic books? Like, is that...
Yes.
That's their function.
Yes.
Okay.
The mission of the Grail, as stated by homeboy, I forgot his
name.
Sultan Stall of Swing, is very accurate to the comic one. Really quick, before we move on from this amazing montage, the seduction scene.
Oh, yeah.
Was so funny. And such a good twist, because I thought, man, he's going to sit down and he's going to charm the dress right off of her. And instead he just threatens her.
He's just,
And it's so much funnier for that. Like that was when I was surprised. And I was like, man, Herr Starr is capable of a lot. I wonder what he's going to do to actually get her intrigued by him. And instead he just threatens her. And it's so good.
Yeah, I guess the thing
and the
is,
way he leans in and everything, I was like, oh god, this
like
is
I wonder if
hilarious.
these evaluations they clearly weren't, like some of them were pass fail. Like if you died in that electrocution, then you were dead.
I feel like he passed every single one. Like,
Yeah,
with
so it's
flying
like-
colors.
it's
We're
like-
like, you know what? That's effective. You don't need to seduce when you look like that because you can't. Like he knows his strengths.
He knows the strengths.
And
yeah.
he fooled me for a second because I was like, he's gonna find a way because he's crafty. And I was like, wait, what am I talking about? Of course he's not. But one thing that you and I usually pick up on is we pay a lot of attention to characters' body language.
Yeah.
And you and I always laugh together when we're watching something and a character walks funny. For some reason, this always gets to us.
Yeah.
And his walk is absolutely hysterical.
Mm-hmm.
The scene where he wrestles the guy and then he walks off and then he
Yeah.
walks back with like the nightstick or whatever he has and like bludgeons him and then he walks away again. That weird little scoot he does is so funny. And just, it's like, all I can think of right now is Tom Hardy. Like Tom Hardy frequently has weird ways of walking, and you and I always chuckle about it. We're just like, yeah, that's pretty funny.
It's part of the affectation that
Exactly.
he puts on.
And something about the way Herr Starr walks around in those scenes is so funny. He's like this weird little old man.
And I get like part of my fascination with it is just the idea that I don't think if I was an actor I would ever be able to affect my performance that much.
And it's such an ingenious way to do it too, because Dominic Cooper has these little facial expressions, like we've said, and Joe Gilgan also has like the facial gymnastics he does,
and
as
he
well
does
as
a funny walk,
a little bit of physicality, and it's in his wardrobe. Like this is obviously part of the craft of actors, is to find ways to bring these characters to life. But Herr Starr is somewhat handicapped and enhanced by his one eye. Like there's nothing he can do with that besides what's already done, which by the way, it is spot on. His face is like just absolutely perfect. But finding, aside from the wardrobe, he has very distinct wardrobe.
It's distinct, but it's also kind of well, I don't know. Maybe distinct is the right word.
I mean, in terms of the Grail, Grail suit.
But it's a uniform and it's everybody's, so it's not like he can necessarily shine through himself in that.
He already has the hat though.
Okay.
The hat is what ties it together, and the hat doesn't come about until a little later in the book, and it's for a very specific reason that's pure gold. I'm glad that he already has it because it sets him apart, aside from his facial scar. But anyway, I just think that that's such a nice touch.
Yeah.
And it seems like the kind of thing that Pip probably brought to the table. Like I feel like his audition was probably spectacular because he just seems to have nailed it so outright, along with Joe Gilgan, to the point where they probably read and they were like, "Wow, you are absolutely flawless." Like, they probably got offered the job there and then. But that just those little things that are breathing life into these guys are just so phenomenal.
Absolutely. And he killed Saltonstall to take over. And
that was good. I kind of I started to see that coming. I was like,
okay, oh, they're by the balcony.
When is he going to kill this guy? Yeah.
The terribly green screened London skyline balcony.
I know, it was like the opening of Sin City. I was like, what the shit?
Yeah,
but I didn't care. It
didn't bother me at all.
The final shot of that scene was really cool, where the poster of Christ rolls down behind him, and he looks like Hitman. Just all over. That was really cool. It's just that whole chunk. This was one of my favorite episodes of the show. Yeah, it's such a contrast for me to some of the most recent episodes, and it's not only because we got introduced to Herr Starr, which is something I've been waiting for, but it just has so much momentum for it, and it does a lot of exposition without it feeling like it. Like it catches you up on a character and brings them into the world and positions them into where they're going to be in such an effective way that I thought it was just very, very, very well done. Yeah,
going back to do an origin for somebody can always feel kind of like
we're playing catch up.
You can do that poorly, and you can slipstream them into where you're at very poorly too. Yeah. So to have it feel like they successfully pulled it off, I think was very good.
Yeah. But anyway, back to what you were saying before I kind of derailed us. Yes, that is the mission of the Grail the mission of the Grail is to safeguard the bloodline of Christ and to basically keep it alive for the apocalypse, basically the end of the world. Because as they say, or as they predict, when the end of the world comes, people are going to be lost and leaderless, and they're not going to know what to do, as Herr Starr pretty much says, and he thinks it's ingenious. And I did love his bit about like, do you know how we achieved this? Because he says, like, we're in control of pretty much all major world events. And he says, I assume a combination of, what do you say, economic
and sexual
control
blackmail.
and sexual blackmail. Which is so funny and so well done. But that is their mission. And like like Sultan says, those are means to an end. Okay. Like they don't necessarily take pleasure in that. Some of them do, because you kind of see like Herr Starr's like, I was promised all these women, and he's like, if women are what you want, then yeah, that's what you'll get.
Yeah.
And like obviously it kind of speaks to that somewhat perverted nature that some feel religious leaders have. Like a lot of people, I think, that are very, very critical of religion, they think that people in power, absolute power corrupts absolutely, basically. Yeah. And if you have power, you're going to abuse it, and you are not necessarily going to even abide by the same things that you're preaching. And I think that this is well established in a lot of media. Yeah. You know, and I always, recently, I think of True Detective, how it did a really good job kind of talking about that. And then like Spotlight and these kind of movies that call attention to these sort of things. And in this show, I think that they're wholly embracing that kind of idea from the books. That, you know, Herr Starr may be working for this organization, which may, on paper, I can't even say on paper that it has a noble goal, because it really doesn't. But, you know, he's kind of like, oh, I'm going to do insane sex stuff. And then his boss is like, yeah, cool. Like, if that's what you want, that's fine. You know what I mean? But he seems to believe a little more in the Grail's cause, his would-be boss. And Starr just kind of seems to want... He has his own agenda as laid out in his resume or his job application, which says he basically wants to eradicate the Earth from
the parasites.
Yes, exactly. And he just wants the platform from which to do it. Yeah. But his goals are going to shift slightly, and I'm really excited to see that happen.
Interesting. Yeah, he seems to me like this is, and I'll say with the last thought that you left off on, he seemed to me as though this would maybe potentially be like a stepping stone into him gathering more power.
Yes. He's doing it partially out of a combination of that boredom. Yep. But also he doesn't want to have to answer to a guy who he thinks is kind of a schmuck. Yeah. Like I don't think he respects him. He's like, yeah, whatever. I could. Why would I sit here and be your right hand man when I could just throw you off the balcony and
be you?
And he just thinks that's how it's going to work too. He's that confident. He's like, I'll just sit down on the desk and then I'll be the guy. Yeah. Like I'm not the guy behind the guy. I'm the guy. There won't
be any question. But that's kind of how it was, even in the fact that he shoots his other contestant.
Right.
Like that's how that works in the Grail, it seems like.
Exactly.
Almost,
yeah, that ruthlessness will be rewarded because you're showing that you're willing to go
for the mission
to pretty much any length possible to advance. Yeah. And I think that his real leaders in the Grail respect that level of like that of relentlessness.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Act 5, final act of the show. Jesse pays a visit to the man professing the end of the world to talk about why he does what he does. He says it offers the people the ability to worry about something other than how horrible they themselves are. He also thinks that all the crazy things that happened happening have increased since Tom Cruise exploded.
Yeah.
But there always seems to be an explanation. Jesse also asked him about the soul selling and whether or not someone selling 1% of their soul to help their friends is worthwhile, but the man thinks soul selling is the most obvious sign of the apocalypse. I've got 2 other points for the act, but we can kind of stop there and talk about these conversations. Glad Tom Cruise exploding came back because that was a good note that they kept hitting on the first season.
What does he point out also? He says pigs flying, Trump, and he says something else.
Yeah, he says, I've got it here in the notes, he says that Cubs winning, pigs flying.
Yes.
So, yeah. I guess I didn't really think about the whole, like, it's literally a flying pig.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I know. I kind of thought the same thing, too. It wasn't until because the first scene happens and they show the couple kind of celebrating it, and I was like, what the Yeah. I was kind of like, I don't get it. And then when they're watching it on the news, then it kind of started to click. I was like, oh, he's not really flying. He's floating.
It's levitating.
I get it, though. I mean, it makes sense. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, it's I like that so much of the writing on this show is very, like, they go with Occam's razor, so to speak. Yep. Like, what should it be? Oh, well, what do people always say? When pigs fly. Okay, well, how about we make a pig fly? It's good. It's really good. It's just to the point, and it makes sense. And it's the kind of thing where it would be unbelievable, and yet we would all kind of laugh and go, well, how about that? That's literally what happened.
I like that Jesse kind of found an ally in the guy professing the end of the world on the corner of the street. Like they have this built-in camaraderie of and Jesse doesn't even necessarily look down on the guy. for not being like a priest or whatever, but he still they have this common ground of being believers in God. That
and I think that they both think that they're right.
Yeah,
and I think that they both like thinking that they both kind of enjoy the other one kind of buying into their shit, sort of, you know what I mean? There's a weird level of that sort of understanding, but it's almost not real understanding. It's hard to I think it's kind of a complex scene, and I'm actually a little upset that I don't remember more of the dialogue.
Yeah.
This felt like my favorite scene in the season so far was still the one where they talked to the manager of the strip club. Yeah. I thought that was something really magical.
Yeah.
And this kind of reminded me of that. Like, I really love these Jesse kind of one-on-ones with people who are going to be able to advance his search.
Yeah.
And I think that this guy kind of almost cued him to get out of New Orleans. I thought there was some sort of line exchanged where he basically kind of thought he needed to move on. And maybe it wasn't in this scene. I remember getting the feeling that Jesse thought the search here was just about done. Maybe it's after the scene where he goes, maybe I was wrong about this place.
That was actually in like the first act.
That was earlier? Okay.
He walks out of the last jazz place.
Okay.
And he's just kind of like, I feel like maybe it was a mistake coming here is what he says. So I was kind of like, oh, maybe they will get out of here before the end of the season.
Did I ever hope so? Yeah, when he said that, I kind of breathed a sigh of relief. I was like, yeah, let's move on.
Yeah.
And it's not that I don't like the backdrop. It's just I think there's so much potential for them to be out and about. And I get the restrictions of where you can film and that sort of thing. And I know that this is a deviation from the book and that it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think that the potential for maybe some better storytelling exists elsewhere.
Yeah.
I just hope we don't fall into this pattern of like spending the bulk of a season in one different city each time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Although that is more variety than a lot of other shows get, the part of Jesse's quest is just being on the move and seeing new places. And, you know, Preacher in the book is often a sort of a love letter to America and some Americana. And some people have called it an indictment of that, but I think it's kind of a mix of both.
Yeah.
But you know, that goes hand in hand with traveling and seeing more of it. It's almost this giant, we've said it before a million times. It's a giant road trip story.
Yeah.
So it's a cool New Orleans. We've said this to death already 100 times. It has a lot to do with that world and the merging of the supernatural and the natural world. It's a good place for that to happen. So anyway, I liked the scene a lot because I thought it reminded me of that earlier scene. And I like these kind of moments where Jesse gets some real insight, but nobody else from his party is there to like bear witness to it necessarily, or they don't pick up the same thing he did, because Tulip's with him in the scene with the owner of the manager of the strip club.
Yeah.
So she is there for that, but these little intimate moments where Jesse's quest, however misguided it may be at times, he kind of gets the fuel he needs to keep going. Just when he kind of is ready to give up, he kind of stumbles.
He finds that next breadcrumb.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's really, really fun to watch him. And the guy who plays this guy is really good.
Yeah.
Because he's so conversational. He's not like a giant weirdo.
Yeah.
Like you see him and you expect some.
It seems like his 9 to 5 is coming to
right.
sit on the
yeah,
corner.
And you expect some, again, really broad interpretation of like ranting homeless man.
Yep.
But he's the part where he's like, well, I got car payments and a drinking problem, so I better get back to it. The way he says, like, oh, my 15-minute break's over. I gotta get back onto the floor and keep yelling.
Yeah,
it's just a very funny way of looking at it.
That was John Ailes.
He is great.
Yeah.
Again, the show does a great job of finding these little people and peppering them everywhere, and just really creating the tapestry of this world.
Yeah. Next on this final act, Cassidy makes it out of the hospital. He was I forgot to mention that he was locked in the morgue.
Yeah.
Someone came and let him out, but he sees a couple crying over an older man, presumably a parent, but it causes him to think about Denis.
I thought it was.
It looks a lot like him.
It looks a lot like him, and I thought, are those Denis kids that we didn't know about, and thus Cassidy's grandchildren?
Yeah.
I was like, oh, wow. And then it cuts to him at the house, and I was like, oh, never mind.
Yeah, no, that felt weird to me, too. So.
I thought that was going to be it. I thought that was going to be it. I was like, there's Denis, those are his kids, and all we're going to get from that is Cassidy looking through the window and kind of going, well, doesn't that just suck? And then move on. And I was like, damn, cold, but awesome.
Yeah. Tulip notices a bullet hole in the back of the fridge and heads to the Hurt Locker, where she agrees to get shot. When getting shot, she imagines it's the Saint of Killers. She gets up in 4 seconds and then asks to go again. I kind of read this as like her kind of facing her fear a little bit, and I don't really know. I don't want to commit to that. I don't think anybody should quote me on it necessarily, but it felt as though she gained some power over that fear when she felt as though she survived a shot from the Saint.
I think it's worse than that.
You think it's worse?
Oh, yeah. Because that sounds like a good thing. That sounds like the kind of shit that turns Bruce Wayne into Batman. No, yeah. This, to me, and this is part of my two-part thing, I kind of talked earlier about how I thought I wanted to see how Jesse was going to react to having part of his soul be gone, and I thought that Tulip's reactions right now seem to be more what I would have thought Jesse would be feeling, the kind of something isn't right feeling.
Yeah.
And maybe he has it, and he's just pushing it down for now. But I kind of think that, and this is something that a lot of our listeners' feedback has kind of made me think about the Saint of Killers more differently than I normally would. Because I think a lot of the characters, I'm very ready and willing to look at all the characters in the show as different from the ones in the books. But for some reason with the Saint, I'm a little more rigid on it.
Yeah.
But some of our listeners describing him as maybe having these abilities of like insight or, being able to, him basically having more powers than I initially would have given him. I think maybe he is almost representative of the Angel of Death almost in a way, even though he's not. That is presumably a separate character with a separate job. I kind of think that Tulip in a way cheated death, and she maybe feels like she should be dead, even though she doesn't know it. So I think on the one hand, describing it as her facing her own mortality is very valid. And obviously, as we said before, she lives this lifestyle, which is pretty conducive to getting killed.
Yeah.
So she doesn't necessarily seem to think about the consequences so often, and maybe that is part of it. But I think that maybe she was kind of supposed to die there. And as she even says, like, if it wasn't for Cass, I would be dead.
Yeah.
So Cass is literally like her guardian angel in that moment. Like, he literally saved her life. And I think that in a way she was pretty much earmarked for death. Like, her card was pulled. She's ready to go. And because it was averted briefly by Cassidy, she's in this kind of weird limbo.
It's like
place.
A weird survivor's guilt kind of.
Yes, yeah, kind of. And so I think that whether it is an unconscious thing or there is something larger at play, like she was supposed to be dead and now the order of things is a little bit askew for her, I think that that's kind of what's going on. And I think that her getting shot made her feel for a second, I think she's basically going to become addicted to this kind of thing. And she may be even more of like a thrill seeker, even more caution to the wind than she was before, and she might start putting herself in like really crazy situations, and Jesse might come to blows over it, with him kind of being like, what has gotten into you, like why aren't you taking care of yourself, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And like she might start throwing herself more in harm's way because I think she feels close to death again, and maybe that's where she feels like she should have died. And obviously, things aren't really great for her right now.
Yeah.
Anvil was blown up, so her only family is gone. Her little family unit with Cassidy and Jesse, she seems happy when it's like functioning, like when she's making pancakes and they're all together. But then Jesse gets angry and storms off, and he's looking for God. And Cassidy is a vampire, and she probably has a little bit of self-loathing that she's attracted to him and feels like he is her confidant, even though he's clearly kind of a bad dude. And she sees what happens to people who love him, basically, to like his own blood.
Yeah.
Get stuffed into a crappy apartment in New Orleans and then just die.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that doesn't know her place, and I think she really has nothing to look forward to, and she's not going to kill herself, but I think she, in a way, was like, this is where I die.
Her it's like she's subconsciously atoning for, like, her body's moving her towards these things that will right that wrong.
Yeah, that kind of unbalance.
Yeah.
Because I think that, and I do have to go back and watch the scene where the Saint has her by the throat and he's like probably going to kill her. What does he do when he's going to kill her? Does he put her on the ground and he pulls out his sword?
So when she brings up his family, when she's trying to get Denis out of there to get his medicine, he stands up and holds her by the neck.
Uh-huh. And he draws the sword.
No.
Okay.
He lets her go, and then she goes back to Cassidy and is like, he touched me. And then later in the episode, when Jesse's late, he pulls her out of the room, throws her on the ground, pulls out his sword, and then Cassidy grabs it.
Okay.
So those are kind of two different instances.
Yeah, so maybe I'm off there because the grabbing by the throat is the moment that had the impact. Unless
they both did, because as you said, she's like, I would have been dead. So obviously,
she is dreaming of the two moments. She's dreaming of Cassidy's fingers and as well as the shot. I mean, clearly the moment when he had her by the throat is the moment she keeps coming back to, because she's like floating in the dream, and she's like she doesn't have her feet on the ground, so she's just kind of helpless and weightless, and he's just got her. So maybe it could be that he has that kind of touch of death where you feel it and suddenly you're not whole anymore.
Yeah,
but it could be something larger. Is kind of what I've been driving at, that there's something has happened here that wasn't supposed to happen.
Yeah.
And maybe even if it's nothing cosmic and supernatural, it's just something inside of her where she probably feels like she should be dead, and maybe she right now doesn't feel like she really has a reason to be living.
Yeah.
Although she didn't go for the hand cannon, so clearly she went with a lower caliber bullet.
That's true. She already saw what happened to Cassidy.
Yeah, that's true. She didn't want the insta-kill. She wanted to roll the dice.
Yep.
You know, she's playing Russian roulette, essentially.
There might still be that little bit of humanity holding on, being like, don't. All right, and then the final part of the episode, in Vietnam, Herr Starr has killed the village and the pig, and he's headed for Jesse in New Orleans next. Jesse sits at Denise watching a newscast about the massacre in Vietnam and hears it was the water that kills everyone and also caused the pig to float. And this robotic voice offers an explanation of like, yeah, what was the line?
Are you a scientist?
Are you a scientist?
Shut up.
Shut up.
That was great.
But this scene, Jesse's sitting there watching of the like, oh, there's the flying pig. And then they're like, it was the water. Is that it harkens back to that conversation earlier in the act of like, there's always an explanation.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like a true, actual, right explanation, obviously, but
no, but people will accept it.
Yeah.
And isn't there a line to that effect of like you can say something and people will in general just go with it if it helps them? Maybe I'm thinking of a different work of fiction altogether. But if you feed something to people and if it's good enough for them, then they'll just accept it.
Yeah, I don't remember something like that being said, but that doesn't mean it wasn't.
I'm sure I'm just thinking of something else. Like it kind of reminds me of Men in Black, where Tommy Lee Jones tells him like there's always some crazy looming threat, and as
500 years ago, people thought the world was flat.
Mm-hmm.
Think about what you know tomorrow, what you'll know tomorrow. Yeah.
It's as if an hour ago you thought you were alone. We were alone on this galaxy. Yeah, and imagine what you'll learn tomorrow. Something like that. I shared that recently on Facebook. Actually, it's one of my favorite scenes.
It's a fantastic scene.
This show could use Tommy Lee Jones. That'd be awesome. And Ben Mendelsohn, because he should be in everything. But it kind of reminds me of that, where like there's always something really terrible, but as long as you tell people what they want to hear,
you got that rationalization for it.
But I think it also plays into on a darker note. You know, they bring Trump into this directly.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure, you know, in the wake of the election, Rogan and Goldberg probably turned to each other. I imagine them sitting next to each other on the couch at all times. They probably turned to each other and they were like, yeah, did we just strike gold? Because it's almost the kind of thing that like another comedian like Mel Brooks or somebody would totally capitalize on and be like, you know, I'm going to use this kind of thing. And it is, I mean, we obviously already lived in crazy times, but we live in even crazier times now. I mean, to the point where it is a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, day-to-day.
Where we don't know what we're going to be talking about next week in the news. And there's so much, and I don't want to say the words fake news, but there's just so much unfounded opinion being thrown around as fact, and so many people gobble it up like it's truth.
Yeah.
I mean, how many articles and stuff do you see shared on Facebook and Twitter? It's
like all it is now.
Right, yeah. And the things that people, and to the point where people don't even read the articles anymore. If the headline, like I saw somebody just do this on Facebook where they shared a story and people started commenting based on the headline, and they're like, read the article. That's not what they're saying. And it's so crazy where people can't be bothered to click and scroll and read.
Well, my cousin always posts these things, not to put her on blast, but she's never going to listen to this. So she always posts these things that are like from websites that are like fox19news.com, which are a bunch of fake sites.
Right.
That legitimately, like if you scroll to the bottom and hit the about page, it's like, this is a satirical news site or something like that.
Or there is no about, because it's just somebody's opinion.
Yeah.
And they cleverly named it to be disguised as a factual
something
news
legitimate.
outlet.
Yeah. So it,
And so I think that this is pretty much just their indictment of that some clearly fake like text to voice program was fed this information to the point where, it's like, are you a scientist? Shut up. And people would watch that in real life and go, you know what? I'm not a scientist. And that sounds legit to me. There's too much hydrogen in the water, so shit started floating. Makes sense. Hydrogen makes things lighter.
Yep.
And without even thinking about it or bothering to even question it. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Like it grinds my gears just even in this show thinking about like how it's hilarious. Don't get me wrong. It totally cracks me up. I was laughing a lot at that scene too, because I was like, man, what a blatant way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, really effective.
Absolutely.
I like to think that the Grail doesn't necessarily have to be that clever sometimes.
No.
Herr Starr knows like what will work.
As long as they remain unseen, they can kind of feed whatever they want.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I really like his phone calls, and I want to know. I think I know who he's talking to.
The weird thing to me is that it sounds like he's talking to somebody, but it doesn't sound like a superior. It sounds like it's somebody back in the office that's like, all right, where am I headed to? Like he's asking somebody what's next on the agenda, not like he's not looking for command. It's
interesting. I kind of thought the opposite.
We'll have to see. But there was something about the way that he was talking to whoever it was that to me felt as though they weren't a superior, that it was just.
Well, when he asks for backup, right? He's like, I'm going to need a lot more, because he thinks he's going to have to like shooting gallery the village basically or something. He's like, doesn't he requests a bunch of stuff, and then he realizes like, wait,
he's got a much easier
I have
tool.
a simpler and better way to handle this. So it seemed almost like he was reporting to somebody, saying like, I'm like requesting maybe not requesting, maybe he was just talking to like his clerical staff back at the office, saying like, all right, you're gonna need to put in an order for all this shit because this is what I'm gonna need.
Yeah,
it could be that. You're right. I'm kind of assuming based on other knowledge that he's talking to a superior.
Somebody important from the comics, probably.
Yeah, because he doesn't answer to many people, but he does have
superior,
people. Someone he answers to.
We'll see. You never know.
I'm so excited that he's here because the Grail are a phenomenal like force of antagonism, and they run throughout the book. Like I think they're there for almost all. They're kind of like the Saint of Killers, where they're not always there, but they're always there.
Yeah.
Like I said before, I think it was in the previous episode. In the books, there's many forces all trying to find Jesse because they all want to access him / Genesis for different reasons, and this is just another one of those parties that's going to be.
You're reminding me of like Fallout, where there's like several factions that want to use your skill set.
Exactly,
to do something.
And meanwhile you have Jesse, whose sole goal is to try to find God, and so he is following his own breadcrumbs, to borrow what you said earlier. Meanwhile, dodging these things, and like I said, he'll zig out of the way of the Grail only to zag right into the Saint or somebody else, and sometimes all the lines converge, and it's just the best.
Interesting.
So I'm really glad. I think part of the reason I loved this episode so much, aside from just in general the really good storytelling and acting, was we've got another face and another force of antagonism.
Player 2 is anything. Player 3 is anything.
Basically,
game.
And it's awesome.
Awesome.
It was a great episode. I think one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Certainly one of my favorites of this season. And I'd love to hear what people have to say. I wonder if people will not like the things that I liked.
We'll see. We'll see what they say.
I didn't like the things they liked.
We will say. I feel like most of the people that liked the Soul stuff were people that were not comic book.
Right, or at least
readers.
Have the objectivity to enjoy it for what it is, unlike me, who's marred by
despite us having that conversation saying you should enjoy things despite
it's so hard, yeah. And it's always like the following week I look back and go, man, was I wrong? Or what do you think though? I mean, I'm assuming this is kind of our second half of the season. Yeah.
No, I mean, to me I don't necessarily know that it, because of the origin, to me, it didn't necessarily feel like a ton of forward motion, but I see that we're setting out for something that is going to.
This is just maybe more satisfying table setting for me.
Yeah.
Maybe I like this better.
Yeah.
Because it has to do with something that's going to spur them into action.
Yeah.
It is episode 7, so it's kind of that middle, that transitionary episode.
Yep.
Where like every Marvel show has episode 7 seems to be one of like stepping back and recalculating.
Pivoting. Yeah.
Yeah, and pivoting. So like whereas the big bad in 1 through 6 was the Saint/Victor, now we're probably going to focus more on the Grail.
Yeah. Which I could totally see. And I will know, I think Vegeta said something about the Comic-Con panel. I didn't watch anything because I didn't know spoilery-wise if there was going to be anything that I shouldn't know or see, but I know they put out a trailer, and she mentioned that Herr Starr was pretty prevalent in it. So I would assume that is the right way to go. I am interested to see if they do make it out of New Orleans, because I think that would be good. Although, as I think I brought up a few weeks ago, they did read that season 3 will be shot in New Orleans, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to take place there. I don't know.
I think I have some theories about that, but it will probably have to do more with Jesse's past. That would keep them there.
Okay.
Well, we know by the end of this episode that Herr Starr is on his way to New Orleans.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And we do know that his events in Vietnam are running concurrently with Jesse's because he's watching it on the news.
Yep.
So it's not like that was all happening 2 weeks ago, and so he's on his way there. So there some things are going to come to a head there, I think.
Yeah.
And obviously, Featherstone has already made contact with Jesse, and she was kind of the recon to investigate whether or not his power was legitimate.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and then it got handed to Samson Unit.
Right.
So, yeah, this article says this is NOLA.com is the website. I think it's a New Orleans newspaper. AMC Preacher files paperwork to shoot season 3 in New Orleans, and it says that the new season will be shot on an estimated budget of $70 million, up slightly from the $67 million estimated for the 13-episode season 2. An estimated $50 million of that season 3 budget will be spent in Louisiana, with $19 million of that earmarked for in-state payroll. So,
in California, I assume.
It says in-state payroll.
In-state is
yeah, I don't know. I don't necessarily know that. Maybe they mean 50. Out of that 50 million, 19% of it is for people, the people that they're hiring.
Yeah.
Maybe that's
perhaps.
So.
Like locals.
Yeah.
Well, do they say how many episodes season 3 is going to be?
I don't think hasn't been
released yet.
Officially released yet.
That's
I don't
exciting.
even know if it's officially. Did it get renewed? Did it get renewed for 2 seasons at a time? I think it did.
Maybe. It's exciting. I'm glad it's doing well. I've been bad about watching the ratings and the viewer count, but it seems to be doing well.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing that kind of worries me is that I've been looking in Wikipedia. They tend to compile the ratings data.
Yeah.
And season 2 generally looks to be down compared to season 1.
Really?
Yeah. So
I wonder, and obviously we are in sort of a transitionary period still as far as how people are watching shows. So I wonder which data is like the old like Nielsen ratings and stuff that carry over from like old people watching it live versus people who are streaming it after the fact.
I know that somebody out there, I think Nielsen does report like a plus DVR or something like that. But
like your brother is going to binge it when it's over.
Yeah.
He'll watch the whole season in like a couple days.
Yeah.
So I think that if anything, that model might be even more of what they pay attention to.
Yeah,
now.
The money they get from Netflix or Hulu, I guess it's Hulu in this case, the money they get from Hulu to be able to show it, that kind of thing. So obviously there's more. And AMC, once again, barring Rubicon, has been pretty good about giving these shows chances to find an audience. Breaking Bad could have gotten canceled in season 3 and it wouldn't have been like
Could you imagine?
Exactly. So, and as we know, Halt and Catch Fire got a 4th and final season. So
That's
they're very
so
much
awesome.
like we're going to let you finish telling the story that you're telling. So I think Preacher being what it is, I think they would certainly allow it time to.
We should probably record some kind of podcast about Halt and Catch Fire, you and I, because I feel like we are responsible for keeping that show on. You more than me because you've been watching it.
Yeah.
But during season 1, we were texting each other so much about it
and
like encouraging each other to keep watching it. And I haven't watched season 2 or 3. And last night when I was watching this episode of Preacher, it
previews.
It played the trailer for season 4, and I like got weirdly weepy. I was like, "Oh my god, they're all still here," and it's clearly building towards some sort of conclusion. And I was like, it was almost like walking into like a reunion of people you haven't seen in a long time, and they all look a little different, but you're just excited to see
every season of that show has been like that.
That's so cool.
Season 1 was like in the 70s. Season 2 is kind of 80s. Season 3, or I guess seasons 1 and 2 are kind of 70s, 80s.
Yeah. It's kind of in that transitionary.
Like all 3 of those seasons are somewhere in the 70s and 80s. They kind of come up like 5 to 7 years in between each season, and then this final one supposedly is going to be like 90s to now ish.
Wow,
is what I think I've seen.
It's too bad Lee Pace is ageless and shows no
they just
evidence.
Have to change his hair.
Shows no evidence of time passing.
Anyway, we are very far off the track. Well, not that far. But
I think all we can say is please watch AMC's other shows too, because honestly,
give them all a chance.
You can skip The Walking Dead if you want.
Yeah, forget about that one.
It's got enough
That
viewers.
one doesn't need any help.
Yeah, exactly. But good luck with Rubicon. You'll never find it.
Yeah.
But that's a real shame.
Yeah,
'cause it's damn good. But *Halt and Catch Fire* is great, and obviously, if you haven't watched Breaking Bad, it's probably the greatest show ever made.
For sure. Once again, you can find more episodes of our podcast on g2tpodcast.com. That's the letter G, number 2, letter T, podcast.com. We're also on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and Google Play Music. We're G2T Podcast on Twitter, and you can email us g2tpodcast@gmail.com to tell us what you think of our podcast and share your thoughts on AMC's Preacher so we can read them on our show. Send us corrections, observations, or anything regarding Preacher or our podcast, as you guys have been doing. It is fantastic, and we love hearing from you. The Midwest Podcast Network has other shows about video games, horror movies, and HBO's Westworld. Find out more about these shows as well as how to support the network at MidwestPodcastNetwork.com. Our theme music is the song All In by The Red Thread, and it is being used under a non-commercial Creative Commons license. That's all for this episode of Gone to Texas. We can't wait to see what next week's episode of Preacher brings, but until then, go forth and speak the good word.